Hey, thanks for tuning in to Walking in Victory. The conversation you're about to hear is one of the best conversations I've had with this stranger in a very long time. I saw this girl and I felt like the Lord was telling me to go and speak with her, and she really didn't disappoint. From everything from her childhood to dealing with addiction to now dealing with the current spinal cord injury that she has today, she really opened up and shared an amazing testimony. If this blesses you, please give this channel a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy.
I grew up Catholic. My parents are still Catholic, and I never resonated with the faith. There was a little time period where my family started to go to a Presbyterian church, but my mom she was always Catholic, and she never felt like she was being like properly nourished there. So she would go to Mass really early in the morning and then join us for the church that we went to. And that was where I really started to grow my faith. And then my parents both decided that we were all only going to go to a Catholic church. And so they kind of took me out of where I was growing spiritually and put me into some place where it was just really hard for me to get to know God. So in order to get through that, I started to play in the church band, but I wasn't actually believing what I was singing or believing what I was playing. Because I played saxophone for them, and then I also did a choir. And I thought the songs were beautiful, but I didn't believe a word that was in them.
Interesting.
So during that whole time, I would say I was probably agnostic throughout my high school years. And then I took a class in high school. It was like the philosophy of good and evil, and I don't know, it was just like this very complex philosophy class. And we had to write a 20-page paper proving or disproving the belief or the existence of God, and whether or not, humans were born good or evil. All of those like big philosophy
That'll
questions.
make you think.
Yeah. And what was funny is I didn't follow the assignment because I couldn't. I was at this point in my life where I didn't have the answers. And so I wrote an argument for both sides on everything. But then the more I started to write, the more I realized one side really had more solid proof.
Wow.
And that was the side of believing in God. So that was kind of the start. During that time, I started to get pretty involved in drugs and alcohol, my later years of high school. And I went off to college. So like I had that seed, but I went off to college. I was still very much into my addiction. And then a big trauma happened to me. And so what was kind of funny was when I was writing that big paper for that class, I came across, I believe her name is like Simone Weil or something, and she writes on the love of God and affliction. And I had been dealing with health issues my whole life, and so that really resonated with me. And then when like that big trauma happened to me in college, and when I had to withdraw from college, that was the only thing kind of helping me make sense of it all. So I still was sort of struggling with belief in God. But then I ended up going through 2 bouts of rehab. And in the second bout of rehab, I finally got into AA. And in AA, it says like your own understanding of God. And that was what got me in the door, because at that time, it was really hard to believe in the Catholic God that had been kind of shoved down my throat. And I was pretty mad at God
Right.
about everything that had happened in my life. And I had a lot of trauma growing up too, like all throughout, a ton of abuse. And so it was just like, how would a good God let any of that happen to somebody? So when I first went into AA, it was nature was my higher power.
Nature.
Being out in nature, because I knew that was going to be a way to get me back to where I needed to be. Because whenever I felt like I was struggling with my relationship with God, I would go out in nature, and I would look at everything and be like, okay, this is divinely created.
Yeah.
And so if I wasn't at that point yet, but I knew I would get there. So I did that, and then my mom leads prison ministry, and so she and I had a phone conversation one day, and I'd been really closed off to religion up until that point. And she told me about an exercise that she does with some of the women that are incarcerated that she works with. And she said that she has them go through the Bible and just circle and highlight words of what they want their God to be. Words that really resonate with them. And so I went and I did that, and that was like the start. You know, it was all the loving, forgiving. And then after doing that, I started to be able to really find a relationship with God. And that's kind of how I started to then read more of the Bible. And I think I needed that little intro that was kind of like baby food.
Yeah.
Practical
exercise.
Yeah, in order to get into the more like hard-hitting stuff of, you know, God is both loving, fully loving, and he's also a judge. And so like finding that like two things that seem to be contradictory can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
But I needed those steps to get there.
Sure.
So I was living in Houston at the time, and I was working, and Hurricane Harvey hit, and I got really sick because I'm allergic to mold. And so,
To mold?
Yeah, and I was right in the middle of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to live there and work afterwards, and I was having anaphylaxis multiple times a day, just in and out of the hospital a ton. So and part of that was because I have a very rare disease. So this is where like everything solidified finally. There are 4 specialists in all of the U.S., and they had 2-year-long waiting lists. And I was on the waiting list for all of these 4 specialists. One of them was in Arizona. So my cousin had a wedding in Arizona, and I flew out there for her wedding. And when I was there, I got a call from the one in Arizona saying, hey, we have an opening in an hour. Can you make it here?
And you're there?
And I'm in Arizona. So if she had called me when I was in Houston, there was no way I would have made it in time. It's more than an hour-long flight. So it was just like all of this stuff started to happen at the same time.
Yeah.
And I went there, and she gave me hope for the first time. She's like, this is what the treatment's going to be. It's going to be literally a full-time job. I need you to move here as soon as possible. And so I went back to Houston. I packed up all my stuff, and I moved to Arizona. And so I was doing all that medical treatment stuff, but I needed to be in Arizona, because Arizona is like, they have some of the best churches. My aunt and uncle are there, who are some of the strongest believers I've ever met. And so I was able to get such a firm foundation and like find what my faith really was.
Sure.
And that was really great until I got my spinal cord injury.
Spinal injury?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm wondering how far to go into this. So I was dating a guy at the time, and this was during COVID, and all my doctors were like, you know, you're extremely immunocompromised. We need you to go someplace where you can be completely quarantined from everybody. Um, and so I went and I moved back to Ohio to live with my family for a little bit. Part of the reason was one of my medical conditions makes me pass out with heat. And so whenever I was in Arizona, I would pass out during the summer because it's really hot.
Yeah.
So I was living in Ohio, doing pretty well. And then my boyfriend begged me to come back to Arizona. And we had been talking about marriage and all this kind of stuff. So I thought it was for a proposal. So I made the really dumb decision, and this factors into my relationship with God, because I think I was so angry at myself that I deflected it towards anger at God. So I moved back to Arizona, and he broke up with me. He wanted it to be in person to break up with me, and it was because of my health issues.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And so then I was stuck completely alone in my in my apartment, and I was passing out more than 10 times a day. And so I wasn't able to get back to Ohio, and I was just stranded with my own thoughts. I was devastated, really mad at God. And then I I'm a big plant person, and I had all of these plants throughout my apartment, and it's I needed to water them. So one day I stood up on a bar stool to water one of my hanging plants, and that was the time my body decided that it was going to pass out. Passed out, fell backwards, got a head injury, C1 spinal cord injury, and dislocated my hip. So thankfully, though, I was really angry, but God was kind of watching out for me. So my neighbor, who was right above me, he was in AA. And so he and I, during COVID, would socially distance, check on each other. And so he had a key to my apartment. And sometimes he would find me passed out, and he would have to just give me medication and stuff. Well, he found me, which saved my life. And he found me so quickly. Normally he would check at the end of the day. He checked right in the morning. And so that was C1 injuries, most people die right away.
Well, it innervates your breathing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So that saved my life. The other thing that was really cool was I had a caregiver, and she has a strong faith. But up until that point, I didn't really want to hear about her faith. But so after that, I was paralyzed completely from my chin down.
Right.
C1, and it was horrible because I was a person that read my Bible multiple times a day. That was how I really connected to God. And I didn't have that anymore.
You couldn't pick the book up.
I couldn't pick the book up. I couldn't turn the pages, nothing.
Wow.
And so I had to learn a way to have a relationship with God beyond what I was used to. And that was prayer. And so I would just spend hours every single day just praying in the presence of God, praying for people. And it used to be I had a prayer closet, and I'd go in the prayer closet and I would pray for people, but everything was connected to a thing or a place or some object that helped me connect with God.
Right. Wow.
Well, I wasn't able to do any of those things, go any of those places, and so I had to learn how to be connected to God without anything else. And that, it was tough. And sometimes I felt like I was going crazy. But it was really helpful for kind of learning how to connect with God.
It forces you to connect with Him. If you just pray
Yeah.
You had time. You had the time to do it as well. Some people are so busy they don't have the time to pray, but you were forced to have the time, right?
Exactly, because I couldn't get the medical treatments, and I had to medically withdraw from college again.
Sure.
Because I, couldn't do anything. So, and what was funny was like I was praying all that time, but you would have thought I would have been so serene once I gained back a little bit of function. I was throwing stuff around my room, breaking things. Like I was so mad when I finally started to get back a little bit of movement. But I think I needed that. Like I needed to be angry. You think about David and so many of the psalmists that are just Job, pleading with God, and they're angry, and rightfully so. And I think that actually allows them to have a more genuine relationship with God.
It's honest.
It's honest. And what was interesting was I felt like Job in the sense of what my friends were telling me. Each of Job's friends, one is well, what did you do to deserve it? Or, the other one, I don't every single one had to go back to it was my sin, or something that somebody did, or that God was punishing. And it's no, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Sometimes, but that I didn't feel like it was that case. And there were other people that were telling me that God was going to heal me. And I had so many people be I had one friend who she told me that she got a vision of me standing up and then healing thousands of people. And while I believe that can be true, it just doesn't, every single time I prayed to God, it's been, I need you here right now. Mm-hmm. This is the way that I'm using you. And so it was interesting for me to kind of learn that sometimes you're put into these seemingly hopeless, helpless situations, and God uses it.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to be there. Yeah.
Exactly. If everything was just rainbows and butterflies, there's not really a reason to come to him if everything's going well. So it's almost in his mercy that we go through difficult situations like yourself. And so would you say in that is when you finally truly put your faith in Jesus, after all that happened?
It was before.
Yeah.
It was probably in, I think, October 2018 was when I answered to an altar call. But our relationships are always evolving.
Right.
Always getting deeper. So that was when it was truly professed with my lips. And
sure.
But yeah, I think I've gotten to know God and Jesus more every single day.
Absolutely. And where would you say you're at now?
It's a good question. Not where I want to be. It seems like when I just get out of a trial, my faith wavers a little bit. It doesn't go away, but I struggle a little bit with seeing the purpose. And I'm somebody, I'm a huge intellectual. I have to, know. So, my grandpa just died, and then I was in a very abusive relationship that I had to stay in because of blackmail. I got my dog stolen from me. This is all within a month. And then I'm an athlete, and I was training for the Paris Paralympics. Came very close to making trials, was just off by one person. And then after that, I found out that I can't play that sport anymore, which was like my whole life. That was kind of what gave me purpose. It was during like that really tough time within the relationship and stuff. It was the one thing that made me look forward to getting up. And so, like to have that kind of taken away was really tough. I had 2 failed surgeries back to back on the same thing that made it. This is probably TMI, but so people with spinal cord injuries can't like pee, so you have to catheterize. Mm-hmm. And I got these surgeries to make it so I could catheter my belly button, but the surgeon messed it up and made it so pee was always spilling out of my belly button. So for 6 months, I basically couldn't leave my bed. I couldn't work out. I gained 45 pounds, like all of this stuff because a mistake a surgeon made. And so it was just like thing after thing after thing. And I'm slowly trying to rebuild. But it felt like I couldn't really get a break. And like in the past, it was, one big trauma or one big thing. And then I, prayed and got over it. But this was just thing after thing after thing all at the same time. And it's been just kind of tough.
What do you think God is teaching you through these trials that happen over and over and over again? What is he speaking to you about?
That I have some golden calves in my life. Wheelchair rugby was one of them. Relationships, ego. Like I've always been very into success. And I think I've been, like I have 2 jobs and I'm in school full time and I'm just kind of like killing myself with all of the stress. And so I think that it was a reminder that there are things that are more important in life, and being content and having a relationship with God are more important than any of those other things. So I'm just like finally trying to get back into that. So.
It's easier said than done, because a lot of the things that we do in life that we enjoy are here and now. It's tangible. Rugby, you enjoy that in the moment. You feel it. Relationships, that person's right in front of you. And you can interact with them, right?
Yeah.
But God is not right in front of you per se. But when you have those moments of deep quiet time and worship, I know for me, it's almost like he's right in front of me. It feels as if he's right there. And there's times where I'm even brought to tears because I feel his presence so deeply. And it's just this euphoria of goodness because I know how good he is. And then I contrast that with the world and I know how imperfect it is. And it just makes me feel so thankful that he'll never leave me or forsake me.
Yeah.
Now, when you go through those kinds of things, it kind of feels like he's leaving you or forsaking you, but really, he's actually even closer than you think he is, especially in those moments. He's always there. It's just like when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. They hid from God because they thought that he would shame them and all these things. But he looked for them. And he clothed them, actually, because they realized they were naked. So it says that he found like animal skins and provided that for them. So like he did that in his grace and mercy. Was there consequences? Of course. There's always consequences to our decisions. And there's just consequences of living in a fallen world, as you have experienced. Yeah. And so it sounds like you're wrestling with God right now and trying to believe that he is good and life is good despite trial after trial. What do you think it's going to take for you to get to the point where you fully believe that he is good no matter what happens?
I think I do believe he's good no matter what happens. I'm just mad.
You're allowed to be.
And I think it's just going to take some time. Like I need to feel my anger. Like rugby was how I got out anger. And it's like I grew up in a household where even though like some really bad stuff was happening to me, like I had to act like it wasn't. And so that's kind of in my nature to not express the anger. And so I think that something I've been working on is knowing it's okay to have emotions and to feel mad and feel sad. And I think once I do that, I'll get away from like the resentment that I'm feeling towards God, because I know he's good. It's so not contradictory. It's I don't know what the correct word would be, but I think that sometimes I have like a dualistic mindset, and really it's both and. And so knowing that God is both good and some bad stuff can happen. And that's okay. And he uses it for good, even though right now it does not feel good.
Exactly. Yeah, it reminds me of like Paul when he was in prison. He said that he's found it, like the secret, that he's found what it means to have joy when he has everything, and he's found what it means to have joy when he's in prison and beaten. And I really think that to me is true success in life, is knowing Jesus Christ, knowing that no matter what situation that you're in, you know your eternal security, but it's more than that, just knowing that you're loved and that you're not alone in any circumstance. And that takes work. It takes prayer to get to that point. It takes a dying to ourselves to get to that point. Yeah. But ultimately, it is possible because we've seen it in Paul and we've seen it in Jesus himself. And ultimately, he's going to redeem everything. So all the things that you're going through right now, this is a small blip in eternity. But when it's all said and done, you will see the fruit of that someday.
I love how you mentioned Philippians 4 without mentioning like the infamous verse, because you're actually using the real context of that chapter. That actually, I've been going back to Philippians a lot lately.
That's one of my favorites. Is there anything that you would share with whoever's watching to encourage them if they're going through something similar that you're going through?
Yeah, I think it's okay to grieve. There's a grievement process. You look at all of the people in the Bible who have gone through grief, and they go through the depression and the bargaining, and finally they reach an acceptance.
Right.
And it's healthy. Like, it's healthy to express that grief, and to even healthier to come to God with it. It's when you leave God out of your grief that you're kind of taking the purpose out of what you're going through.
Yeah. You can't skip a stage of grief. That's actually unhealthy because you haven't let your body and your mind fully process what happened. If you just try to push it down, that ends up coming out eventually in bursts of anger or drug use or whatever that looks like. And so, like you said, it is very healthy to express that, and to know that there's no condemnation for that. God wants you to be honest with him, and he takes that and he meets you right there, because he himself also suffered more than we can imagine on the cross, because he loved us, because he wanted to have a relationship with us and be relatable. ultimately God is a relational God, and that's why he made himself human.
Yeah.
That way we can relate. And suffering is part of humanity, and therefore he willfully took that on for you and for me. So I appreciate you sharing everything you shared. You were very vulnerable and open, and that's what this whole podcast slash YouTube channel is about, is honest conversations that are vulnerable, that help encourage and inspire other people. So thank you, Madison.
Yeah, thank you.
you.